Hello, and welcome to the second episode of the Community Deck Showcase. I'm your host, aReNGee, and first of all, I'd like to thank everybody for their kind words for the first episode that came out. I know that it wasn't quite what a lot of people were expecting, but I got a whole lot of constructive criticism from it and even more positive comments about the video. And I'm back with the second episode now. We've got a new format. We've got a whole ton new decks that were submitted, so that's great to see. And I'm excited to see what you guys think of this one. So once again, this is a work in progress, so please leave all your comments at the end. I look forward to hearing, what you liked about it, what you didn't like about the format, and what can be improved for the future. So, as alluded to, this is a new format, so if you'd like to take a look at the deck list, I suggest you pause the video now or pull it up on another tab from the comments, as I will be talking over the video for this one rather than just having the deck list up and then popping over to the gameplay. So, this is a deck submitted by MrMeaker, and it is Praxis Aggro, although probably not the variation that you're familiar with. There was a very popular Praxis Tokens deck for a long time that used Fire's, Granite and Generation with Obelisk to go wide. This is looking to use more of the powerful time aggro cards that they got in the recent set with things like Resolute Monk and Psychalis, backing up mainstay Teacher of Humility with a smattering of fire cards to round it out. You've got Torch plus Purify as really good early game clear, and then Begone and a new addition in Ankle Cutter in order to punch through those Sandstorm Titans and Veras that would previously give this deck a lot of trouble. There's also a number of attachments with the Shogun Scepter and Long Barrel, boosting up your units that are already in play, giving them a bit of a pseudo charge angle. So a whole lot of overwhelm. Your opponent is not going to be able to block very well. A lot of ways to clear the way early. And as a bit of late game there, you've got Magus of Celerity, giving your other units charge, as well as Psychalis just being a huge, hard to kill charger. Um, so the deck comes out of the gates early, and it doesn't let up the pressure. If you're able to get down a nice 1-2-3 curve, it can be tough for decks to compete. I wouldn't necessarily say that it's faster than a strong Praxis tokens draw, but it definitely attacks from a different angle. Our second deck here is an Elysian Killers list submitted by Kenny, who submitted a whole ton of decks to this, so big thanks to them. Um, Once again, if you'd like to take a look at the deck list, this is your point to pause the video. This deck is reminiscent of the older Xenon Killers list that really focused on getting killer on units and going for recursion. However, rather than killering up a single unit, usually a Dawn Walker, and recurring it over and over, this list focuses more on spreading the fun around with a whole ton of units that can get huge value out of killer, as well as a trumpeting Warhowler to just toss it onto anything. Surso has obviously always been a powerhouse with Xenon Initiation, turning it into pseudo removal, and then both Feast Caller and Behemoth have triggers or attack triggers that happen when they use their killer abilities, as well as the standard Dawn Walker shenanigans with the large units. So a bunch of power and a lot more removal than you'd expect out of the traditional Elysian deck. Between Permafrost Equivocate and now all these Xenon initiations, it's pretty hard for any opponent to build a board of comparable size. Even with deadly units, you've got the Sursos to break through. So, pretty interesting there. It also makes good use of Great Valley Smuggler as a undercosted 4/4 for 3. So, one of the strongest smugglers still remaining, and you've got the power of Teacher of Humility at the bottom of the curve to boost it up. It's a pretty strong deck if your opponents are crunching in the mid game, with a number of different lines of play that you can do, with the initiations really giving you a lot more control over the battlefield than the standard Elysian play big guy, attack with big guy um, strategy would imply. You've also got a couple of spicy market cards with things like Sandstorm Scarf and Infinite Hourglass, giving you those relics to boost up the Smuggler, and a Curiox if you really want to take to the skies at the end there. So an interesting take on it, Elysian. Generally a underplayed archetype, so it's good to see somebody doing some innovation there. Our next deck is called Factory Press, and it's been submitted by Melevorn. This is certainly not your grandfather's Ricano deck. If you'd like to take a moment to peruse the deck list, please pause the video now. This deck list is built around the namesake card Golem Press, which, if you're not familiar with it, whenever you don't have a Golem, you can pay to. It's a relic that you can pay to summon a 1/1 double damage Golem. And this deck takes advantage of this endless supply of Golems by boosting up a whole bunch of weapons. There's Long Barrel to give them Overwhelm, Warhelm to give them Charge, Ornate Katana to cycle off of them, and a couple of Sword of Icarius for good measure. There's also a traditional card in these weapon decks, Oni Quartermaster, to get card draw out of these weapons, all these weapons that you're playing, and get value that way, as well as a new card in Kenmo, which builds a whole bunch of +7/+7 weapons, which on a double damage, that can do a whole lot of damage. An interesting absence here is my favorite card, Recano Artisan, which you'd think would be pretty good with 17 attachments to buff up, but didn't quite make the cut here. Hojin, obviously insane with weapons, although notably Highland Sharpshooter, a longtime friend of Warhelm, is absent. So a couple of interesting exclusions here. But definitely a deck that gets to play a bit of a longer game than the standard Recano. It can pop off with its usual Hojin's shenanigans, but generally likes to play a little longer of a game with things like Oni Quartermaster plus Ornate Katana, giving you a little bit more late game. Another interesting card here is the newly buffed Factory Quota, which prevents opponents from gaining life and deals with them that way. No ankle cutters here, but definitely trying to stop the Vera problem from a different angle. So a very interesting take on Rakano, and one that I'd be interesting to see develop further, as anywhere I can find an excuse to use Rakano Artisan, I will. Our final deck today comes from fuzzyfrog, and it is a 4-color control list. If you like to peruse the deck list, now is the time to pause the video. We've had a number of other 4-color control lists submitted, both to this episode and the last one, but I chose this list to showcase because it was splashing fire rather than the much more common shadow out of a TJP shell. The most notable card here is the inclusion of 4 copies of Display of Instinct in the main deck, which are, I believe, the primary reason for the fire splash. Display gives these decks an out to sites that TJP really struggled to deal with previously. They didn't play enough units to contest them, and if they played more units, they just walked into their opponent's removal that didn't really have any other targets. So now they have an instant speed way to interact with a card that pretty difficult to interact with. Also gives 3 copies of Torch for a bit more of that early interaction, and fuzzyfrog's deck doesn't need to lean on Hailstorm quite as much. At the top end, rather than the temporals or Channel the Tempest that you may have expected to see in the past, we've got 3 copies of Sword of the Sky King and a single copy of Zelchi. Zelchi, a card that had been making a whole bunch of waves in his faction's deck, and being marketable is pretty powerful. Interesting that we don't see any copies of Temporal Distortion in this list with 3 brilliant ideas. That may be something that moves into later builds, but this deck was focused on. fuzzyfrog said that this deck was focused on closing the game faster with the Zalchis, and Display of Instinct goes face, and as does Torch, so it's not too hard to just burn an opponent out. Definitely an interesting take on the archetype, and fire really adds a lot, so we may see more 3 and 4 color fire-based control decks in the near future. And that's all we have for the second episode of the Community Deck Showcase. Thank you so much for watching and for supporting the series. I look forward to hearing what comments you have both about the video and the series itself in general, and any suggestions you may have on how to improve the series. This video focused much more on competitive decks, although we did have a large number of just for fun submissions that may also benefit from a whole lot more of the recognition that the actual video portion of the showcase offers. Would you guys like to see more of those, more of a split, maybe do 2 separate videos? I look forward to hearing your comments and suggestions, and until next time, this has been aReNGee. Thank you all.